Feel stuck between a creek and a critch? I'm Bill Brio, and help is on the way on this episode of Brio TV, the podcast. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today on this episode of Brio TV, the podcast. My guest today is Andrew Barnsley, one of Canada's busiest and most successful executive producers. He's also branching out into other areas, as you'll hear shortly. Before we get to the formal introduction, the episode begins with a little catching up, a little chit-chat and travel talk that I was interested in, and I think you may be as well. Here is our chat. Hello, Andrew.
Well, how's it going?
Good. How are you doing?
I'm good. It's good to see you.
Good to see you. You're looking well. Who do you have on your shirt?
Oh, it's Warhol.
Nice.
Elvis.
Oh, that's fantastic. Good for you. I'm wearing a Gusto sweatshirt.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You know, I have my kids don't recognize me if I'm not wearing something with a logo from a TV business or show.
Oh, that's funny. That's really funny. Well, this summer, my family and we went on a road trip. We were really into it. My daughter likes going to baseball games. So we're like, let's figure out something to do that we haven't done before. So we went on a road trip and we hit Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Chicago, Detroit. And so went to baseball games and all of them. But the Andy Warhol Museum is in Pittsburgh, and it was just awesome. It was really awesome. So it was my first time there, and that's a very cool city. So
I was there many years ago, a long time, like in the 80s. But a buddy of mine wants to go to a ball game in Cleveland. That was near the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame too.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, we did that too. Yeah, Cleveland was great. Some good restaurants. Yeah, I was really. They're kind of these cities that you have to make an effort to go to.
Yeah.
But they all have their own personalities, and, you know, they've all kind of had to redefine themselves because they were these, you know, real industrial cities that's, you know, have had to kind of figure out what those, you know, what their identity is post all of that. So there's some really vibrant, and the art scene is great. The food scene is great. So yeah, I was impressed with all of them.
That's great. Yeah, no, I heard that, especially of Pittsburgh. Yeah. We got a full agenda here. I'll get right to it. Let me introduce you, and then we'll get going here. Okay, my guest today is Emmy and Golden Globe award-winning executive producer and writer, and part of the team behind the worldwide comedy hit Schitt's Creek. His current series, Son of a Critch, is set to return for a third season on CBC early in the new year. He needs another job. He's also the president of the Toronto Film School and very involved in both the Canadian Media Producers Association and the Academies of Television Arts on both sides of the border. Please welcome Andrew Barnsley. Andrew, wonderful to see you again.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, really nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, my goodness. You're the guy to talk to on so many things that are happening right now. Let's just, before we dive into the issues, because we want to talk about the end to the writer's strike and actor strikes and how that's going to affect people in Canada. But I just want to talk a bit about your background. I think you and I first met probably during a studio taping in Toronto of Spun Out, right?
Right. Yeah, that's right. So that's close to 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Time flies, and we've accomplished a lot and done a lot since then.
No kidding. And that was, like, to remind folks, this was on CTV. It starred Dave Foley and Paul Campbell. And a young actress I really like, Holly DeVoe, was in that show. A lot of good casting on there. And you were trying to do this Herculean task, one of the 7 tasks of Hercules, to do a show in front of a live studio audience in Canada. And you gave it a good shot, right? But it just seems really hard, right?
The tough thing, and it's funny, I was having this conversation yesterday about multicams, is they really work when you have volume, right? And that's when when you're in a world where you're trying to be cost conscious and efficient, that they are the perfect machine for television production. You can get a series, an episode rehearsed, blocked, and shot with a live audience in under a week. If you don't have an audience there, you can get an episode produced or shot in 2.5 days. But you need the volume for it to make sense, because the startup costs to build kind of the factory are prohibitive if you're not doing real volume. And that became very apparent for us. And it's also why in season 1, in season 2, we moved from a live audience to kind of just no live audience with laugh track. Yeah. The shows worked, like multicams, from my experience and just, in my history of being a fan of multicams, they are real workhorses as a show. They kind of, spun out, was getting numbers. They were able to, CTV was putting it on the main network. They're putting it on Comedy Network. So it was working. But at the end of the day, the economics are just tough in Canada on those. Yeah. Unless you have multiple series.
So I understand. And you kept working with Dave Foley, though, right? With Kids in the Hall later? Yeah. I thought the Prime Video reboot of their Kids in the Hall was their best work. I really thought it was fantastic. And,
it was so great.
Yeah. Really, hats off for that.
They really found a way, even though they were back, with 30 years later, to have, for their voice to remain relevant. It had evolved, and they were still biting and cutting edge. Like they really nailed the tone of the show, and it worked perfectly. And it's a shame that it doesn't look like it's coming back, but audiences loved it, critics loved it. Again, it's just one of those business things. But
I love seeing those guys struggle with life at close to 60. That made it really interesting to me. Yeah. And Dave Foley's got another job, right? He's doing all right. I think he's co-starring on a show. What's he got now? Do you know?
He's on Fargo.
Yes. Yeah, I've heard of that. Fargo. Yeah. Good for him. That's fantastic. Good Etobicoke lad, that Dave Foley.
Exactly.
Yeah. What you grew up in Toronto?
No.
Oh, no, you're East Coast, aren't you?
Well, yes and no. I was born in Lethbridge, Alberta.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah, I lived there until I was almost 13, and my family moved across the country to Halifax. So I went to high school in Halifax, started university there, Mount Allison University, and then made my way here to Toronto by way of Ottawa and Fredericton. And I've been here. I moved to Toronto to go to study at TMU, formerly Ryerson's Radio and Television Arts program, and then my master's in communications at York.
Yeah.
And then just been here, produced a feature film during my master's program, met some people, including Paul Bellini from the Kids in the Hall gang. Met woman by the name of Jane Ford, who is writer, showrunner. And Jane and I started a sort of production company while I was doing a master's program. And coming out of my master's program, we sold a sketch comedy series to Chorus, a series called Listen Missy. This was like 2003. And that starred Kathy Greenwood, Diane Flax, Lisa Merchant, Jen Baxter, and Janet Vandegraff. That was sort of the core cast.
Great cast, yeah.
Yeah, it was amazing. So we did that for a year. Worked with a company called S&S Productions, they were producing at the time the Red Green Show.
Yeah, Steve Smith,
yeah. And that's kind of like coming right out of my master's program, just kind of built this foundation that, kind of put me on this path that I'm still on.
Andrew, that's like the most Canadian 3 minutes I've ever heard anyone in television here rattle off. That's quite an incredible story. You covered every base except maybe Dawson City.
Yeah, exactly.
Good for you. Wow, that's fantastic. Worked, and then later, my son actually graduated. It was still Ryerson. It was still radio and TV. So familiar for sure with that program. Now, also, let's just dip our toe into JANN, which you were also involved with. Just quickly, you had a special, a Christmas special last year, reviving that series. Any chance we'll see any more of Jan Arden's adventures?
It's just a tough one. And this is kind of what you navigate in this world of independent production and just and financing is tough on all of these.
Yeah.
We knew, and Bell Media knew, that there's an audience for Jan. But again, it's, big financial pieces move around and it just wasn't tenable. The best we could do after season 3, which was our last full season, was work with Bell Media to do a Christmas special.
Yeah.
And that's a way that we kind of tie up the loose ends creatively. And it really feels like that's probably the end of the series. But it was, anytime you can get 3 series or 3 seasons to air in Canada, Jan is such a talent, such a naturally funny person. I don't know if I know anybody else as funny as her. And such a worker too, like work ethic she had,
and fearless, up for anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Physical shtick.
We the fans loved it, and we had a good run, and it's just so proud of that show, and that is still out there. But it's we probably won't see any more episodes of that.
Well, I'm sure CTV will rebroadcast the Christmas episode again. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
Now, I would be remiss if I didn't ask about one other thing here in your resume with Schitt's Creek. My God, and I assume that you were in Eugene Levy's COVID tent the night that they backed up all the trucks full of hardware for you guys. What was it? 9 Emmy categories. You swept everything. Never happened before, ever. What was that like that night?
Yeah, it still gives me goosebumps thinking about it. It was, this was the height of COVID. It was September 2020. We're all locked down. There were, I think, maybe about 12 or 15 of us that got together at Casa Loma for the broadcast, but also there were Emmy crews there to film it. But we had to, the COVID protocols were very tight. All of our households had to be tested, and not just tested, then quarantined before we could go. And then it was almost like we were, bubble wrapped, taken to the car and delivered to Casa Loma. But boy, it was special on so many levels. I had been to the Emmys in LA the year before with the team. And when you're at the Emmys for the telecast, it is just such an enormous production. There's so much fanfare and theatrics and just buzz and publicists and photographers and all that kind of stuff that you actually... it's about the Emmys. It's not about the team or the show. Mm-hmm. And for us, it was about the team and the show. We were together and we had this moment and this night to celebrate. And we hadn't seen each other in, probably close to a year, if not longer. And to come together and to experience that, I can't. Wow. Yeah, it really, there's no words, and you're there with everybody close. And we're all like, it's funny because, maybe I shouldn't say this, but we knew that there were 2 Emmys in the building, two of the statues. And we're like, okay, well, Catherine will probably get one, and maybe, Eugene should get one. Anyway, we're trying to do the math. And then it just kept going. Catherine was the first award up. Yeah. And then it just kept going and going and going. And
unbelievable.
Yeah, incredible. It really was unbelievable. Yeah, I can't. How do you ever top that? It's impossible. But
it's good for you. And weren't the statues delivered by people in costume? Weren't they?
They were in the quarantine, like
penguins or something.
Hazmat outfits, yeah.
Exactly. Very memorable, just on every level. Is there any chance? I keep seeing rumors that there might be a Schitt's Creek movie or something. Is that ever talked about?
Yeah, here's what I can. It's really Dan and Eugene's decision, and
Right.
that's something I know that they think about. We know that there's an audience there, and yeah, it's really that's their call. I mean, I would love to see it, and I think there's probably real material there to explore kind of the lives of the characters and where they are and where they ended up and that sort of thing. But yeah, I don't know what Dan and Eugene are thinking, but hopefully.
Fingers crossed. You can't get enough of those characters.
Yeah.
And I know that, the networks were scared of the title, right? At first, I remember talking to Eugene Levy, and he was dug his heels in. It had to be called that. What else might it have been called? Do you have any memories of other titles?
Oh, well, I can tell you that there were no options.
Okay, good.
And it was funny because, I kind of was like, what could it be? Are there options? And it just wasn't even a conversation. It was, this is it. And, the story that's out there that's true is, Eugene just brought in, a phone book or some a phone listing and just showed that it was an actual last name.
That's fantastic.
And that's what it is. That's what we're calling it. This is how it's spelled. So I don't know what the issue is. And he was able to kind of convince CBC of that.
Isn't that hilarious? Like a lot of us, we'd be happy just to hear Eugene Levy read the phone book. So, and Dan, they are a very talented father-son. It's an amazing story. Don't go away. We'll be right back with executive producer Andrew Barnsley. What's new this month on Super Channel? Well, the royal mob's still at it. Think the Sopranos were a murderous crime family? Forget about it. Fact is, Great Britain's royal family had control of much of Europe and beyond under Queen Victoria. The series combines scripted drama with commentary from expert historians to tell the tale of one of the most compelling, powerful, yet dysfunctional families in history. If that series makes you lose faith in humanity, be of good cheer. Every Friday, there are also new episodes of The Chosen about the life and times of Jesus Christ. And by the last week of November, Super Channel's Heart and Home channel will be unpacking their annual gift bag full of holiday movies. 'Tis the season. And remember, Super Channel, an all-Canadian service, is available via cable providers across the country, as well as streaming live on demand with Amazon Prime Video channels and Apple TV+. You can also check out the new streaming channel, Super Channel Plus, available now on the Roku platform in Canada. Have you been watching the new reboot of Frasier on Paramount Plus? Kelsey Grammer, who played the fussy psychiatrist for 20 consecutive seasons on Cheers and Frasier, has moved back to Boston. Besides Frasier, Paramount Plus has the new Taylor Sheridan Western, Lawmen, Bass Reeves. The anthology series aims to profile a different Old West hero every season. This one is about a one-time slave who becomes the first U.S. black marshal. Dennis Quaid and Donald Sutherland also star. There's also The Curse, the latest from Toronto native Nathan Fielder. Fielder teams with Emma Stone as a couple taking on various challenges, including trying to conceive a child and trying to escape an alleged curse. Expect plenty of awkward weirdness. Finally, check out the latest in the NCIS franchise, NCIS Sydney. That's right, there's a Naval Criminal Investigative Service in Australia. Crikey! Throw another crook on the Barbie. And remember, there's a mountain of entertainment on Paramount Plus. Here he is again, Andrew Barnsley. All right, listen, we better get on to this other questions here. We've just seen after, I don't know, like 6 months, the end to the actors and the writers strike in the U.S., quite a pause on television and very disruptive. And they're coming at an interesting time, TV and streaming and peak TV. It's all such a swirl. I don't know how you keep your head on, but can you suggest just somehow simply what does the end to these and the agreement? Well, first of all, have you seen you're belonging to all these organizations? Have you read the settlement, the agreement?
I haven't seen the writer or the actors one. No.
Okay.
But I mean, our industry is so interesting where, you're never really on solid footing. It's transforming at all times. There are new ways of consuming and new technologies that are coming in at all times. And it's interesting. Like I've had the opportunity to think about this, and somebody who's become a bit of a friend is Dave Thomas from SCTV, and we've spent time chatting about it. And he's just like, we went through this with radio, we went through this with cable, we went through this with specialty channels, we went through it with satellite, and it's just sort of it's an industry that is kind of always evolving. And the challenge, of course, whenever the business changes, and as we know, like with many of these streamers, they're really tech companies. They're not necessarily content companies, and they just approach things a bit differently. And when things evolve, the business models change, and there needs to be that catch up, and on the labor side. And this one has been so big, and just sort of so much has changed. When the previous collective agreements and deals, syndication was still a thing. Syndication is not a thing anymore.
Right.
And that's where, by way of example, that would be a real revenue stream for both writers and actors.
Oh, not just a revenue stream. I did a podcast with Hart Hansen. We talked about Bones, and I congratulated him on his timing. And he said, like that was an oil well, right? At that point, if you had a hit that was on for 12 seasons on a U.S. network, forget about it, right? And that's no longer the case, is it? Yeah.
No, it's not. So when a huge piece of, revenue falls off, it becomes something that has to be corrected. And, it's not like the amount of money in the system has diminished. I'm paying more now for streaming services than I was when I was paying for cable. So
me too.
The money is still going in there, and it's how that's divided. So, in both of these cases, WGA and SAG, it's just that needed to be addressed, and you kind of understand both sides. I also understand why it took so long, because these are enormous entities kind of fighting for, they're both sides and this sort of thing. And I'm just so thankful that it looks like we're back to business. And it impacts Canada heavily, like, not just on the creative side, on the production side, but the post-production side, all at the development side. Like we had to halt development on a number of our projects because even with Canadian broadcasters, because we're dealing with Canadian writers and creating Canadian creators who are WGA members. So it was a huge disruption. I'll tell you also, Son of a Critch, which is the series that we produce for CBC. It's on the CW in the US. When we were promoting it, we were launching it, none of our writers, which meant none of our creators, and none of our actors, meaning Mark Critch or Malcolm McDowell or Ainsworth, none of them could do the publicity for it. So it all landed on me, which is that's not really my wheelhouse. So all of a sudden I'm doing the junket work and this, but so I'm happy to report not just to myself and my family, but to audiences everywhere that I won't be doing that anymore.
Well, it must have been wonderful to have the CW have Brad there reach across the border and give the Son of a Critch such exposure, right?
Yeah, it's wonderful. And Brad and I are really good friends. We worked on Schitt's Creek together, of course, and we stay in close contact. And for this to land there, and for Brad to support it the way that he has, I keep reminding him that he has the blueprints to get us Emmys. So
that's funny.
That again.
We're talking about Brad Schwartz, of course, the president of the CW, Toronto guy who I think he brought 45 Canadian shows to his network in the last year, and Son of a Critch is one doing very well. So yeah, that's pretty cool. But what about this is what's confusing me a bit about the two sides of the border. I guess the Canadian actor and writer guilds, are their contracts up in the next year, or are they going to have to deal with these same issues soon?
Well, I will tell you, the residual systems are very different, and they have been, and that's sort of been sort of helpful for Canadian producers, and it gets into you can get in very granular on some of this and why it kind of should remain that way, just from a production finance and economic point of view. But of course, this stuff will have to be addressed. I think it will probably be, what will happen is, well, I would say where WG and SEG landed on the residual side is almost already where a version of where ACTRA and the WGC are, where royalties are based on revenues, they're not based on plays. And that was the issue. So that's sort of something that when it becomes a percentage of revenues coming in that you base the residuals on, whereas previously in the US marketplace, particularly on network, residuals were based on plays, and that was never the case with the Canadian guilds.
But isn't it, Andrew, from what I understand, one of the frustrations for the guild members was that with streaming, it was harder to tell how many plays, how much revenue, that the performance of a show is something they don't share as much as traditional networks have. So how do people know how their shows are doing in order to be in on the revenue?
I can tell you from my point of view, where we license to like a Netflix, there's a clear license fee. There are revenues that you can point to, and then it becomes sort of whatever the math is on that the split is. So there's that. So it can just be a function of what the license fee is or what the production budget is. Right. Anything performance based, that's where it is important that there has to be some visibility into the data.
But just, and this may be an oversimplification, but from what I understand, Netflix literally, they like your show, they pay for the show. The money comes up front, right? More than it did traditionally. Okay. So in that way, it's actually a very modern solution to this, I guess, right? As long as you're agreeing that price is the right price. And are these issues, you're a member of the Canadian Media Producers Association, so you're much more obviously plugged into that side of this equation, right? How much a show needs to generate in order to be something you can make, basically, or show, or right?
Yeah, I mean, production financing is its own beast, but basically, what as Canadians, generally what we do is we budget a series. We know that we have a sense of what we can finance, the level we can finance to. We look to our Canadian broadcasting partners. We look to funding agencies like the Canada Media Fund, our tax credit systems, sort of both at the provincial and federal level. And with those sources, on a half-hour comedy, we can generally get to about 75 to 80% finance. And then what we do is we turn to the international side. So foreign sales. So we either go direct to buyer, like like a CW or or we look to engage a distributor. So in the case of Schitt's Creek, we worked with ITV. ITV was our distributor. In the case of Son of a Critch, Lionsgate is our distributor. So what they do is they put an advance against future sales to cover your deficit to make sure you're fully financed. Then what they do is for that exchange of, for that transaction, they put up the deficit. It's an advance against sales. They then have the right to sell it in all territories around the world except Canada. And then they go and do those deals. One-on-one or whatever the case may be. And that's when they report to us what the deal was, what the license fee was. And then we go through our process of reporting to our stakeholders.
Yeah, I've had the good fortune. I've gone to MIPCOM a few times over the years and witnessed the international. MIPCOM is held in Cannes in France, and it's a great. It's like a football stadium filled with TV people trying to sell and buy shows. Christina Jennings, to me, must be the hero of this. There should be a statue to her in France, because she'll take Murdoch Mysteries and sell it to 130 territories around the world. Are there even 130 territories? But she does it every year, and with Hudson and Rex and everything else. So that's the part of the equation where the money is made, right? That's your
correct. That's how you get into a profit situation. You're not really, the production budget is the cost to make the show. Mm. And then the distribution side is where you kind of make, that's the real business side of it, where you can profit.
I was at MIPCOM the first year that Schitt's Creek was being shot there by ITV, and they take giant containers you use for shipping things and they paint them black and they make it into a place where they do business. And I remember seeing these giant posters of Catherine O'Hara, Eugene Levy, all over France. It was pretty cool, actually.
Cool. Yeah. No, I normally go there every year, and you think about, something like Schitt's Creek or Son of a Critch. Like when you're making a TV show, you're just in a big empty room in,
right.
Creek and on the lake shore, and you don't really think about the reach it's going to have, and you just that's your job, and you're making TV, and you got 100 people acting and moving cables and setting up lights and catering, craft, and all that, and it's just you live in this little bubble, and then you go to MIPCOM or you go to a market, and you're like, oh yeah, that work that we were doing with the lights out with this group of people, it's actually something that a global audience is going to have access to and enjoy. And it's it's a very mind-blowing experience when you're there.
Just to talk a bit about that, because at both of those shows this is true, but especially Son of a Critch, I would think, here's a show, it's based on Mark Critch's life and taking place in St. John's. So a very specific origin story, and it's all about stuff that actually happened in Newfoundland back in the 80s. And you think, well, this isn't people in Scandinavia aren't going to know, or Korea, what the hell this is about. But actually they do, right? And do you have a theory as to why?
Yeah, well, we found this with Canada. So, well, one of the things that we think about as a production company, and we learned it from Schitt's Creek, but also JANN and some other things, is that it's almost like the more specific you get in your approach, your sensibility, your storytelling, the more universal it becomes, because you're getting into things that people can all of a sudden relate to, like Mark's story is a coming of age. It's about family. Yeah. It's about bullying and first loves and this sort of, and so the more specific, you're still kind of exploring these themes. And we found that in Canada, when the show first launched, Son of a Critch first launched in Canada, we were kind of worried about that. It's like, is it too specific, or is kind of what we were thinking actually going to proved to be correct. And it was. We started hearing from coast to coast people saying, that was my childhood. I remember my first day of school. I remember being on the back of the bus and being bullied. And I remember, discovering music and this sort of thing. And, that show couldn't be more specific. It's not only Newfoundland and this remote island in North Atlantic, it's also takes place in the mid 80s. And so we tested, it worked. It really connected across Canada. And then when I was mentioning that I did the press junkets for across America, and I was very interested to just sort of see what would happen. So I think I had 40 interviews over 2 days, and across the board, whether I was talking to somebody in Philadelphia, St. Petersburg, San Diego, New York, it didn't matter. Everybody said that was my childhood. Yeah. And it was shocking because it wasn't. It really couldn't be further from it. But these universal themes and these experiences that are just human in nature, people connect to them. And I think, with Son of a Critch, it just has a big heart, and it's about the character and about the individual, and people connect with that, and they connect with the other members of the family and the community. And it's very easy, almost surprisingly, to make those connections and for it to be relatable. So I'm just so delighted to report that's the case. It's almost counterintuitive, but that's what we've discovered.
It's good news. And, I hope that these folks in the States do get a chance to talk to Mark Critch and Malcolm McDowell. Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. I did a podcast with him. We could do one every day with him. The stories. He's incredible. And such a great resource to promote that show. So I hope that there's a chance for the third season for those guys to get out there. Yeah. That'll be pretty cool. Back with Andrew after these short messages. It's time once again to speak with Emily Gagne at Hollywood Suite. Emily, what do you got for us this month?
Well, it's Noir-vember, so we have a ton of noir films for you to watch this month. But if you're not into that, we have every Dirty Harry film ever made available to watch this month.
Wow, that's a lot of Dirty Harry films.
It is. We are premiering the Deadpool, which is not to be confused with Deadpool, which is the last film in the series. But if you're not into that stuff, we also have the premiere of Neil Young's Heart of Gold, and we're premiering that on his birthday, which is great. And for the people that are getting excited about Christmas and the holiday season, we have 'Tis the Season, which is a documentary about holiday films from throughout cinematic history, which is sort of leading me into the treat that we have coming for people.
What's that?
It's December 1st to January 5th. We have a free preview across Canada with broadcast providers, so you can watch hundreds of films for free. But get a sneak peek this month with our Noir-vember program.
Holy smoke, talk about make my day. Free preview coming up. Lots of great films in November from Hollywood Suite. Well, you've loved her on Mary Makes It Easy. Now she's cooking up a whole new series called The Good Stuff with Mary Berg. What's it all about, Mary?
It's called The Good Stuff with Mary Berg. And when we were talking about it and kind of developing the idea and working through what it was actually going to look like, the main thing we kept coming back to is just filling people's lives up. And that doesn't mean with always big flashy things, but just sharing stories from people doing good things from across Canada, sharing stories from people who are maybe more well-known who are doing good things. There will obviously still be food. Every day I'm going to cook something up that you can make at home, have cook-alongs with different chefs, hopefully get some guests to cook along because I want to convince people that anybody can actually cook. Wow. But I'm really excited to learn. I'm a lifelong trier and I am so looking forward to learning from the different experts we're going to have on.
That's The Good Stuff with Mary Berg, weekdays at 10 a.m. on CTV. And we're back with Barnsley. And when you were growing up, did you have posters of Canadian, any members of, were Wade and Schuster posters in your room when you were growing up? Or
of course, I grew up, I mentioned that I moved across the country when I was a kid, or when I was going into grade 8. And it was a very important move in my life, and very grateful for it. I had to learn a lot, but it was also, you do a big move like that, it can be, tough
traumatic
change. And, there's a lot of, sadness that went along with it. And and this is before the internet and before like FaceTime and text messaging and all that. So you feel, felt kind of lonely, but I really found I was a comedy fan before that, but it really crystallized there. It's just, I found, comedy was a place to laugh and to feel good. But just by great timing of the universe, when I moved there, that's when sort of Kids in the Hall was starting on CBC. It's when Codco was kind of at its height, and those were my heroes. I just found the power of comedy, and it really, those two shows shaped my life, shaped my tastes and sensibilities, and put me on this path that I really didn't know I was on then, but it's really informed everything that I've done, and it came out of those two shows.
Pretty remarkable to do that, to be able to work with those folks. It's sort of like if you grew up in Canada as a hockey player, or aspirations to be a hockey, and then getting to skate with Gretzky or something, right? Wow.
No, there's times I've had to pinch myself in a room with, or going out, having a one-on-one dinner with, or it's just, if I could tell my, 13, 14-year-old self what I was doing, and none of it seems possible, but here we are.
It's inspirational for all of us. It's great. Well, speaking of that experience, now you get to give back to the next generation of Canadian, perhaps show creators, writers, with the school, the Toronto Film School. You're the president of this. Now, this is obviously based. You have a few campuses, a few places in Toronto, right, where you work out of. Talk a bit about that, and what would be the distinction from this place to, say, the Canadian Film Centre?
Yeah, so it was in the third season of Schitt's Creek, where a friend of mine, a guy by the name of Adam Till, who was the creator of Billable Hours, show. He was running the writing program at Toronto Film School, and he reached out to me, and we had done some development together. He reached out to me and said, would you consider coming and, working at Toronto Film School? So I spent some time thinking about it. My dad was a university administrator. So, that was kind of like the university post-secondary is very much in my blood. And so I was interested in that. I had actually done some teaching at Ryerson before that. So there was a lot of interesting boxes to check, but I just, I was, producing Schitt's Creek, and my company was still flags and all this. And I was like, this is something I'd be open to, but we just have to figure out what the role is. So at the time we landed on this role of executive producer in residence. So I did that for 5 years. And that was really like looking at curriculum, making sure it kind of was aligned with industry demands, mentoring, spending time with, students and alumni and faculty, creating connectivity between the industry and the school, doing my best to elevate the profile of the school, that sort of thing. And then after doing that for 5 years, I was asked to, elevate the role into the role of president. And it was something that I thought about a lot. And I thought about, where does a film school fit into the film and television production ecosystem? And what are the responsibilities that go along with that? and what does it do? Like, how do you become, as a school, a solution-oriented stakeholder? I really talked a lot about the ecosystem. I talked a lot about how we're a responsible stakeholder and kind of figuring out what the role of the school was. And while the year that I was offered that job, I also produced 3 series back to back to back. Kids in the Hall, JANN, and Son of a Critch.
Yeah, so my God.
There were things that were painfully apparent where a school could help, particularly in area that, we were dealing, all of those shows were dealing with labor shortages in very specific departments. And basically, as I thought through the role of a film school, it's like, that's the job of the film school. It's really about elevating the industry to make sure that the talent pool is well trained, that when productions are considering coming to a jurisdiction, that they can count on the workforce to get the job done. They know what the job is. So that's really the sensibility that I brought and the philosophy that I brought. It's our job to feed trained and skilled labor into all lines of a production budget. So the difference of approach between, that approach and other film schools is, we do, a lot of students, enter wanting to become directors. That's sort of where a lot of film schools focus. And that's no different in terms of the student coming in at Toronto Film School. But it's our job to talk about the industry, to talk about where the jobs are, to make sure that they're getting a very well-rounded education and set of experiences that make sure that they can move that transition from the classroom or the school studio to a professional set is seamless. So we make sure they understand the culture, the vernacular, the roles and responsibilities, and it's really about feeding skilled labor into a booming industry. That industry is growing. And what's interesting is, since doing this, I get calls all the time from all levels of government saying, we recognize that that film and television production is a growing industry. It's an important and big economic engine in a lot of jurisdictions. How do we get involved? How does a province build its industry? Since working at Toronto, since working in Newfoundland on Son of a Critch, I've become close with the Premier. I've become close with the Minister of Culture there, because it's all about how do we build that labor pool out? What are kind of the levers we need to be pulling to build an industry? I just came back this year, or this past month, from time in Saudi Arabia, time in China, where it's the same thing. People are looking at film and television production as this growing industry. The demand for global content has never been bigger, and these jurisdictions want, and often led by film commissions, like that are funded by governments, are wanting to figure out how to crack that. How do you become a favored or preferred destination for the amount of global television and film that's been produced? And such a big, what I tell them is, you kind of need 3 major things. There's a fourth that's becoming more important, but the 3 real things you need are to build an industry are you really need reliable financial incentives. So it's tax credits or various soft money subsidies, that sort of thing that can be based on the spend of a production. You need physical infrastructure, and then you need a labor pool. And it's the first 2. A government can throw money at and move pretty quickly on, but a labor pool takes time. You need schools, you need that infrastructure to deal with that. So that's where I feel we're positioned in an interesting way, and we're getting a lot of those phone calls and inquiries about how to do it.
And Andrew, just there, I mean, you also need a great idea, or a pretty good idea, and the creative approach. And some of what I hear, and I understand it is booming in the sense that, but each year the the money spent on production seems to increase, which is very encouraging. But also, it's a tough time if you're pitching a show, right? I mean, a lot of broadcasters are on their heels right now, and we've seen in Quebec, even TVA and Global shuts down ET Canada. So it's there's a it's certainly a time of disruption. Where do you find how do you encourage people who are enrolled in your schools to feel that this is a viable alternative, a viable business for them that has legs?
Yeah, well, you're right. And, we as a school, not only do we focus on that sort of below the line labor, it's the above the line too. We want to make sure that we're supporting voices. And no matter what way you look at it, it's that side of the business is tough. Those are challenging jobs. But what I say to all creators is, you have to treat it as a craft. It's like you need to get your reps in. You need to focus on it. You need to make sure if you're a writer, you're writing every day. If you're a director, you're figuring out how to get behind a camera as often as you can. And the tools that people have access to now, just in their pockets, it's never been like that before. So, those are very highly competitive jobs and professions, but you have to put the work in. And this is something that I remind students of all the time. It's like nothing's going to be handed to you. There are no shortcuts. It's you really just have to find your voice and figure it out. But I do also encourage, the creative minds that finding your voice is very important. And going back to what I was saying earlier is, this whole idea of specificity and point of view. That's where the magic is, and it's just kind of find what are the stories and what's the point of view that only you can tell, and that's really where kind of the magic lives. And what's amazing about being in Toronto and being in a creative environment and meeting students in our writing programs. And by the way, our writing program is now run by Michelle Daly, who's a former CBC comedy exec and Bell Media comedy exec. So
that's great.
That's one thing that I really wanted to do, is elevate kind of running our programs and making sure they have that industry connectivity and experience and are able to point our students in the right direction. But what's amazing about Toronto is you walk into a classroom and it's reflective of Toronto. It's the diversity there,
right?
The backgrounds, the cultures. I just get so excited when I see that, because it's like, this is the future of storytelling. And there were a time where most of the history of cinema and television, those voices were really denied access, and now we're making sure that's those doing what we can to make sure those opportunities are being presented to all voices, and we're doing what we can to support. And I just think it's a very interesting time. We are in an interesting time. We're going into continue to go into an interesting time where we're seeing and hearing stories that we weren't really presented before. And truthfully, I sometimes look back at the movies I watched in the 90s and shows I watched in the 90s and even the 2000s. And it's just like, it's not reflective of who we are.
Right.
And there is sort of, it's embarrassing. It's a little shameful sometimes. And I'm just feel very energized when I see who we're graduating and some of the success stories coming out of our writing programs and directing.
It does sound very exciting, Andrew, and hats off to you. This is the Toronto Film School we're talking about. Andrew is president, and your example must be so encouraging to all the students there and anyone involved in Canada in making TV. Imagine having this terrible problem. You've got 3 shows on the air. You don't have time to be president of the Toronto Film School. I know your time is limited. You got other obligations. Just very quickly, I wanted to ask, give me one show you're watching right now, streaming, watching. What's something that's caught your attention?
Yeah. I mean, two of my faves right now are Beef. That's such a fun show. I just like that high octaneness of it, and that's been a really fun one. And Reservation Dogs. I really can't wait for the next season.
It's great how funny that is, right? I mean, that was so a big revelation. Yeah,
so funny. Yeah,
brilliant.
Those are my two faves right now.
Favorite show as a kid? What were you watching when you were a youngster?
I was obsessed with just sitcoms. Like I kind of think back to that era of, Family Ties, Growing Pains, Golden Girls, like those. That was my happy place for sure. Mm-hmm. In addition, of course, to Kids in the Hall and Codco, but there was nothing like those 80s sitcoms to me. But then, this is embarrassing to say, but as I got a bit older, like into my teens and early 20s, the show I obsessed with was Beverly Hills 90210.
Oh, okay. Listen, Jason Priestley. Let's hear it for Jason Priestley and all that gang. That's a great story here. Just a kid from Vancouver who, when he's 21, Andrew Spelling is saying, okay, here are the keys. Go ahead and direct. Pretty cool, right?
Very cool.
All right. Finally, this is the big moment. What is your favorite all-time TV theme song?
Oh boy, I think about this. I just don't think it's going back to the 80s sitcoms again. I don't know. Facts of Life was a good one.
Alan Thicke, right?
Yeah. Growing Pains was a good one. Family Ties was a good one. I think it's just those fun, playful, you knew, and even the openings that went along with those series, you just kind of knew you were in for a good time for the next half hour when those started up.
Well, good choices. Listen, Andrew, we could talk and talk. I'm so grateful for you finding time today. Thank you, and congratulations on everything. I hope you have the Emmys in a cool place.
They're at Toronto Film School.
Oh, that is so inspiring. Yeah. That's not the most beautiful trophy. Next to maybe the Hart Trophy and the Stanley Cup. It's pretty glorious, right? Good for you. Yeah. Congratulations. Thank you very much for your time and the insight, and all the best with Son of a Critch. Season 3, Son of a Critch. Don't miss it. My favorite sitcom. All right, Andrew. Thank you very, very much for your time.
Okay. Thanks, Bill.
Take care. Nice.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Hey, for those interested, more information about the Toronto Film School, and if you want to check out their courses on writing, acting, production, even video game design, go to the torontofilmschool.ca. That's torontofilmschool.ca. A special thanks to this episode for Phil Hong, who engineered the whole deal from Denpasar, the capital of the province of Bali in Indonesia. Happy vacation, Phil, to you and Pearl. Thanks as well to BJ Del Conte and all the Crispy Critters for the Varsity Blues music used on these episodes, even as I speak. And thanks most of all to you, listener. If you liked what you heard, tell your friends. I'm Bill Brio. Thanks for listening.